Okay, I'm back. This is where we ended last time on this guiding question about how do cells maintain homeostasis exactly. The example we just talked about was insulin and glucagon, and those are hormones, and how do they actually make cells change the way they want to. Okay, and the main big next topic is called cell signaling or cellular signaling, and the big idea is that cells can actually sort of talk to each other using chemical signals called ligands. Ligand, which is a word that means a signaling molecule. Okay, so the basic idea is that there are signaling molecules which will bind to receptors, and then that signal will get sent into the cell and things will happen. Okay, so here's a picture. Here's our plasma membrane, our phospholipid bilayer. Here is the inside of the cell. Here's the outside of the cell. Here's a receptor. In this case, it's a transmembrane protein of some sort, and it comes from the inside of the cell to the outside of the cell. Okay, and this is where a ligand, or a signaling molecule, would bind. So it is going to have a receptor that is complementary to it in shape, and so it can bind there. So this ligand shape has to be able to be complementary to its receptor, otherwise it isn't going to be able to bind. Okay, so the ligand binds its receptor, and then the signal goes across that plasma membrane, and it gets on its merry way. Okay, and we're going to talk in detail about how this happens inside the cell. Okay, this TED Talk down here, How Bacteria Talk, is really, really interesting, and normally we would show that in class. I'm obviously not going to play it right now, but if you have time, it's really fascinating. Okay, and I think she won the Nobel Prize. I could be wrong, but I think she did. Okay, it was a woman. All right, the first kind of signaling we're going to talk about is called autocrine. Auto means self. Okay, so autocrine signaling is when a secreted molecule triggers some kind of response in the same cell that made that molecule. So this particular cell is producing these little red molecules which leave the cell and then come back to bind to their receptors. So the receptor is on the same cell that made that ligand. All right, that is called autocrine. You're signaling yourself. Okay, and then there's some cellular response. Okay, cancer often has some autocrine signaling pathways. It is not uncommon for cancer cells to produce their own growth factors that then stimulate themselves to grow. Okay, so here's a picture of a cancer cell. It's producing this blue growth factor, which is then binding to the receptor on that same cell. The signal goes into the cell and eventually tells that cell to grow more. Okay, this is in a cancer cell. All right, in a normal cell, okay, here's the growth factor. Some other signaling cell makes the growth factor, binds to the receptor, okay, and this is not a cancer cell, so then cell division is regulated, the way it's supposed to regulate, and it's not growing out of control. Yeah, Mr. Singer will talk more about actually out of control cell growth when he gets into the cell cycle. Okay, another kind of signaling is called juxtacrine signaling, which means that cells communicate by directly touching each other. Here's a picture of cell 1 and cell 2, and they are right smashed up next to each other. Okay, one example is called a gap junction, which is a channel between animal cells, so things can go directly from one cell to another cell, like signaling molecules can go from cell 1 through this gap junction into cell 2, and they can act as signaling molecules. Okay, so juxtacrine signaling is direct contact between the signaling cell and the cell receiving the signal. All right, muscle cells have a lot of gap junctions. Okay, muscle cells in the heart. Okay, and that allows all the muscles in the heart to expand and contract at the same time, because the signaling molecules can travel through those gap junctions. Okay, here's another example of plasmodesmata. This is in plants. Okay, these are channels between plant cells. This is the picture of the animal cell. gap junctions from one cell to the other. And then similarly in plant cells, they're called plasmodesmata, and they're just channels directly connecting these two plant cells. Okay? All right, awesome. Immune cells also can talk to each other through direct contact. Okay, so here is this green signaling molecule, which is on the surface of this cell, and its receptor is on the surface of a different cell, and they can come into direct contact with each other, and then the signal will get sent off into this receiving cell, and things will start to happen in that other cell. Okay, so that's juxtacrine. All right, paracrine signaling is when some molecule is secreted and travels a short distance and signals a cell that's nearby. So not directly touching, which is juxtacrine, but nearby. Okay, so this cell right here is producing this ligand, or this signaling molecule, this little red dot. They're floating around, traveling through this space till they hit the cell that has the correct receptor, at which point it can bind and send a signal and a response would happen. Okay, so I think we were talking about paracrine signaling. My kid just came in to talk to me. Okay, so that just means a signaling molecule is secreted from one cell and it binds to its receptor in a cell that's nearby to signal a response. Okay, all right, awesome. Here's this example that actually was in that TED Talk that I said you should watch. You really should watch it. It's called quorum sensing. Signal molecules are produced by individual bacteria, but if there's enough bacteria there, lots of those signaling molecules get made and signals a response that's only helpful if there's large numbers of bacteria present. So that's called quorum sensing because there has to be a quorum. I'm assuming you've heard of the word quorum from politics, perhaps not, but anyway, if there's enough signaling molecules, then, you know, the response happens. Okay? Super interesting, and in that TED Talk she talks about it. Okay? All right. Another example of quorum sensing is dental plaque. Okay? And that is when you get this gross, what's called a biofilm on your teeth, which is basically a film of bacteria. Okay, that's kind of gross. All right, and the bacteria get organized into a community, and they start to mature and expand, and they're resistant to antibiotics. So this happens because of quorum sensing, which is a type of paracrine signaling. All right, another important thing that happens is called induction, another example of paracrine signaling. This happens during development, when signals from one cell signals a change in gene expression in a neighboring cell. So here is our signaling molecule in this cell. In this case, it's called an inducer. It's released from the signaling cell. It binds to its receptor in the receiving cell and sends a signal to the nucleus, which causes some changes in gene expression, which is a whole other unit. Okay, and that is a huge part of development. Embryonic development is this thing called induction, which is a type of paracrine signaling. Okay, I think, yeah. Then endocrine signaling. Okay, we've got autocrine, juxtacrine, paracrine, and now endocrine. Endocrine signaling is when hormones are used. You've probably heard of the endocrine system of our bodies, which is all about the hormones. Okay, the signaling molecules are the hormones. Okay, anyway, sorry, the endocrine system is hormones. They get secreted into the bloodstream, and they travel all throughout our blood, because the blood in our body is going everywhere, and they can affect cells anywhere in the body, in theory, okay? The thing is that the hormones are only going to work if they have the right receptor. Okay, so every hormone is going through our body cells via the bloodstream, but different cells have different receptors. So here's an example. Here's hormone A. It's a circle. Its receptor would be complementary to that, so it can bind right there. So this cell right here could be a target cell for hormone A. Okay, this triangle hormone isn't going to be able to do anything to this cell because there's not a triangularly shaped complementary receptor. Okay, on the other hand, this cell here has a receptor for A and hormone B, the triangle. Okay, so this cell would be affected by both hormones. Okay, and this cell only has a receptor for hormone B, so hormone A isn't going to do anything to it. Okay, so this is a really key idea. The hormones are hitting all the body cells, but unless those cells have the correct receptor, they are not going to be able to do anything. All right, so I'm actually trying to greatly minimize my social media footprint, but you know, this is an analogy, right? You post, your friends post stuff on Facebook, you can either respond or not. Okay, so this is just kind of another reiteration of that message that depending upon the receptor that a hormone interacts with, the same hormone can do different things, can affect different kinds of cells, or they can affect the same type of cell in different ways. Okay, so here's an example of the same receptor but different downstream proteins. Here's epinephrine, binds to this receptor on this kind of cell, which has got these glycogen deposits. Glycogen breaks down. Okay, I guess that's not shown there. This one, epinephrine, binds this different kind of cell with its receptor, and we get this response of this vessel dilating. Okay, if this epinephrine binds this alpha receptor, this vessel can constrict. Okay, so epinephrine in this case has two receptors it can bind to, both of which do different things when the epinephrine is bound to it. Okay, another big class of hormones is called steroid hormones. I should say one big class is called steroid hormones, and they affect DNA expression and they initiate long-term changes in the target cell. All right, steroids are a lipid. Okay, they're a family of lipids. They've got this 4-ring structure that's common to steroid hormones. So you can see we have a lot of different kinds of steroids here. Testosterone, estradiol, cortisol, but they all have this 4-ringed structure. Estrogens are a class of hormones involved in sexual and reproductive development, and then estradiol, estrone, and estriol are specific types. So these are classes of steroid hormones. All right, so then the question is, are they going to be, I think I already gave you the answer, water soluble or lipid soluble, and could they pass through the membrane? This is a really key idea. Okay, I already told you these are a class of lipids, okay, which by definition are non-polar and they are fat soluble. Okay, so yes, these can easily pass through the cell membrane, which is largely non-polar. You might have to revisit your notes a little bit on when we talked about the phospholipid bilayer and the things that can easily get through the bilayer and the things that can't. Okay, steroid hormones, since they're lipids, can pass through the cell membrane. Okay, they are lipid soluble and they bind to the receptors that are inside the cell. Okay, they go across the membrane and they bind something inside the cell. We're going to go through this. Intracellular. All right, their receptors are inside the cell. Okay, here is how it works. Here is a steroid hormone, estradiol. It's able to just diffuse right across that cell membrane because it's a lipid. It will bind to its receptor, which is inside the cell. And then here's the hormone receptor complex. Okay, if this receptor is not there, the hormone's not going to do anything. Okay, and in this case of steroid hormones, the receptor is intracellular. It's inside the cell. Okay, and then once we have this hormone receptor complex, it can diffuse into the nucleus, where it will interact with the DNA that's in the nucleus, and it will affect how that DNA gets turned into protein. Okay, that is called a transcription factor. Okay, transcription factors cause certain genes to make new proteins. Okay, it's kind of like an on-off switch for a particular gene. All right, so that would be a long-term effect, okay, of that steroid hormone. Okay, and so by altering gene expression, steroid hormones can trigger production of new proteins. Development of secondary sexual characteristics is a common outcome of these steroid hormones. Okay, another big class of hormones are the water-soluble hormones, and they are more of a short-term effect to affect an enzyme activity. Okay, here's some examples of water-soluble hormones. Water-soluble meaning they dissolve in water. Okay, epinephrine, melatonin, insulin. Okay, they can be proteins. Here's a picture of an insulin structure, which has got all the amino acids linked together. Epinephrine and melatonin are smaller molecules, not necessarily proteins. Okay, and will a water-soluble hormone be able to cross a membrane? No, they won't, okay, because the membrane is largely non-polar. Okay, so in this case, these water-soluble hormones have to use what's called a signal transduction pathway, okay, which is a whole bunch of steps that they go through or that they initiate, which ends up giving some kind of cellular response. All right, I think that I am going to stop right here and finish this in one more video.